Hey, Alan here, and welcome to LIMMM, a series where we explore a combination of music, math, and other subjects. Whether you're a music student or just want to learn a little bit more about classical music, I hope you get something out of these videos. Today we'll be exploring major and minor modes and how this major-minor distinction leads to the tragic narrative of Schubert's second Impromptu in E-flat major. This subject is inspired by a paper by musicologist Susan McClary, who I've been lucky enough to work with. Susan is an incredible scholar and even more incredible person, and I've linked her published article titled "The Impromptu That Trod on a Loaf, or How Music Tells Stories" below. Without further ado, let's get started. Before we can begin talking about the narrative of the Schubert Impromptu, we have to become familiar with the idea of major and minor mode. Now, many of you might already have an understanding of this topic, but for those of you who might need a refresher, here it is. In Western music, a mode is a type of musical scale or a series of notes that is associated with various melodic characteristics. Although numerous modes exist, such as the Greek modes, and continue to be used in music, the two most common modes over the past 400 years or so have been the major mode and the minor mode. During this time, the major mode has been typically linked with a happier, more optimistic mood, such as with this Mozart piano sonata in C major. And so on and so forth. Meanwhile, the minor mode has been typically linked with more drama, melancholy, and tragedy, such as with this dramatic opening of Beethoven's famous Fifth Symphony in C minor. Now, these two excerpts I just played sounded really different from each other, but if we just consider a singular major chord and a singular minor chord, can you believe the difference is just a half step or a single note difference? Now, of course, the associated scales and harmonies are different between major and minor, but if we take a look at just the major chord compared to the minor chord, we see the difference is just one note. But what a world of difference that one note makes. Let's take a look at the differences between major and minor chords a little bit more closely. We see that a C major triad, or a collection of three notes, shares the root C and the fifth G with the C minor triad. The C and G spell out a perfect fifth interval, which is the harmonic scaffold for Western classical music. The third of the chord, either an E natural or an E flat, only differs by half a step, or the smallest interval in an equally tempered 12-tone system of music. However, with this half-step shift, we can go from a brighter C major chord to a darker C minor. It is this fundamental shift from major to minor that leads to the tragedy of Schubert's Impromptu No. 2 in E-flat. I've been teasing at the Schubert Impromptu for some time now, and unfortunately I have to tease it just a little bit more. That's because first, we need to establish what exactly is musical narration. For many of you watching right now, this might sound trivial, either positively or negatively. Many of you might be thinking, oh, of course, music has narrative. The songs I listen to and the movies I watch have music that helps support a storyline. While others of you might be thinking, how can music without a text, such as a piece for the piano, have narrative? It's all abstract, right? Well, if I haven't confused you enough already with major and minor, I might confuse you with this topic of musical narration. This was actually a highly contested subject in classical music, beginning with the new musicology movement in the 1980s, where musicologists such as Susan McClary moved away from a primary research or positivist perspective towards a more cultural study of music. Some areas the new musicologists explored included feminism, gender studies, and critical theory, which encompasses this idea of musical narration. Now, I'm not a musicologist, nor do I want to take too much time away from the Schubert Impromptu, but I do want to say a few words in support of musical narration existing in pieces of music, even if they do not contain spoken word. To performers, the temporal or continuity in time quality of music is a major contributing factor towards delivering a convincing performance. On a very simplified level, not only do you have to be aware of when a climax occurs, but also the prior steps in reaching that climax and subsequent steps in resolution. After all, the resolution of most classical pieces of music, at least up until the 20th century, was a primary concern for composers in how it resolves prior conflicts and provides adequate harmonic and motivic closure. In my opinion, if a performer doesn't have in mind at all times the entire dramatic thread of a work, all the localized surprises, anticipations, delays, and conflicts would not fully connect with a more global structure, and therefore it is much more difficult to convincingly connect each individual nuance with the bigger picture. From a historical perspective, I think it is all too easy to treat classical music these days as perfect gems that should be preserved for posterity. This is not the case at all. People can inadvertently gloss over the culture, aesthetic movements, and individual struggles of composers throughout the centuries that undoubtedly influenced their musical compositions. Franz Schubert is often portrayed as this angelic entity who wrote transcendent vocal music. However, recent research has suggested he was very active sexually and in a possibly homosexual manner. Schubert wrote his impromptus in 1827, just 1 year before his death from syphilis. While Schubert wrote some incredibly beautiful music during this time, he was very sick and suffering, which led to some of his most tragic works, such as his Winterreise song cycle, the F minor fantasy for one piano, four hands, and the second impromptu in E flat. Okay, now with all this background information, we can finally start to talk about this Schubert impromptu. First off, what is an impromptu? Well, it is simply a small piano piece written in the first half of the 19th century. It usually carries a small form such as an ABA ternary or AABB binary, and was suitable to the growing musical market for amateurs and women. The name impromptu suggests a sense of freedom and improvisation, and Schubert took this liberty to experiment more with structure than in his sonatas. The vast majority of classical pieces will start and end in basically the same key. This basically part is rather important. If a piece starts in major, then it will end in major, such as the first movement of Mozart's C major sonata starting and ending in C major. If a piece starts in minor, it can either end in the same minor key, such as with the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony in C minor, or it can end in major. However, one permutation of key relations almost never exists in the entire history of classical music. That starting in major but ending in minor. But this is exactly what happens in Schubert's second Impromptu in E flat. It starts in E flat major, but it ends tragically in E flat minor. Major keys aren't supposed to end tragically. As audience members listening to a major piece, we are implicitly promised a happy ending. What Schubert does in this Impromptu is basically unprecedented in the history of Western classical music. In terms of what going from major to minor means to our musical narrative, to quote Susan McClary, it is like, quote, the protagonist dies, Dracula triumphs, or the heroine gets her bodice permanently ripped. Let's dive into this Impromptu and see how the tragedy unfolds. The form is a variant of an A-B-A ternary. The A section is in E flat major, the B section is in B minor, which is an enharmonic respelling of C flat minor, and the reprisal of A is in E flat major. However, after the second A section, Schubert adds an extra section which can be interpreted either as a variant of section B, so kind of like a B prime section, or a coda using section B's material. This last section finds its way to E flat minor pretty quickly and culminates in utter devastation. The Impromptu begins its initial A section with complete joy and freedom, with its carefree triplets going up and down in register at will. The opening 8-bar phrase is solidly in the land of E flat major, and Schubert repeats the phrase not once, but twice, each time with more optimism. The second time, dynamics are in a strong forte instead of a quiet piano, and the third time, Schubert jubilantly shifts to a register 1 octave higher than before. Although seemingly pleasant and innocuous on the surface, the one visual and musical oddity occurs first at measure 4, with the F sharp on the strong beat. On the surface, it is simply part of a larger chromatic passing gesture in the right hand. However, this seemingly innocuous F sharp has a much more dramatic role to play later on. The note G flat plays a significant role in the middle of the A section, where Schubert, through a variety of sequences, begins in E flat minor already and ends up in G flat major. Both E flat minor and G flat major use the note G flat prominently, and the little innocuous F sharp in the beginning has slightly ballooned to present the first harmonic conflict of the Impromptu, taking away from the previous comfort of E flat major. To conclude the A section, Schubert does find his way back to the opening carefree material in E flat major. However, the reprisal of the carefree triplets devolves as the register gets higher and higher, almost as if it's spinning out of control. The dynamics swell to a chaotic fortissimo, and the dizzying heights crash down in a series of cadences in E flat minor. Just as we think Schubert is ending the A section in E flat minor, Schubert overshoots an E flat minor scale, ending on yet another G flat. Schubert uses this G flat as the root of a G flat major chord, which helps lead into the subsequent B section as a dominant harmony. The B section is in B minor, which is an enharmonic respelling of C flat minor, which is preceded by that G flat major dominant chord. It is full of drama and turmoil, not only because of its minor harmonic implications, but also due to its musical markings. The rhythmic drive is insisting, based on a repeated 4-measure pattern. The dynamics oscillate between loud and soft. There are numerous swells, such as the hairpins in the 3rd measure. There are accents on the strong beats in the right hand, juxtaposed with accents on beat 2 in the left hand. All these elements contribute towards the insistently brutal nature of the B section. At the end of the lengthy B section, Schubert once again threatens to derail whatever semblance of order is remaining. In between the 1-2-3, 1-2-3 rhythm, He increases the frequency of strong beats with several hemiolas, 1 2 1 2 1 2. In addition, the harmony abruptly changes from B minor to E flat minor. Just as things look their bleakest, Schubert pulls the rug beneath this tragic progression by sitting on the dominant, decreasing the volume, and resolving the harmony back towards E flat major in for return of the A section. The return of the A section temporarily alleviates the drama of the middle B section and is an exact repeat of the first A section, including the middle excursion to E flat minor in G flat major, the return to the initial theme in E flat major, and the spinning out of control back into E flat minor. As the A section concludes and the right hand spins into E flat minor, we, the audience, begin to lose all hope of a conciliatory ending in E flat major. Pessimism takes hold at the end of the second A section, and Schubert transitions into a coda section beginning in B minor and based on material from the previous B section. The ending is pure tragedy and brutality. B minor and E flat minor violently interchange with one another. The dynamics maintain a harsh fortissimo. Halfway through, the register increases and the tempo gets faster and faster. All our hopes and dreams crash down in the final measures in a series of cascading E flat minor scales, indicating all hope is lost and whatever promise of a happy ending insinuated at the beginning of the impromptu vanishes. Well, that turned out to be a longer video than I had originally anticipated, but I hope you found the connection between major minor modes, musical drama, and the tragedy of this impromptu to be thought-provoking and entertaining. I'm hoping to turn this into a weekly series, so please consider subscribing to keep up to date and share it with your friends to help spread the word. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked the video, and I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Until next time, keep it logical. Take care, everyone.